So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So talking about reducing embryonic mortality and abortions, and kind of another title for this talk could just be keeping cows pregnant. How we're going to keep cows pregnant. Okay. So one of the things before we start is we kind of need to talk about some definitions. There's three ways we kind of look at this loss. We call them, one of them is early embryonic mortality. So that's loss from 0 to 28 days. And then we have late embryonic early fetal mortality, which is loss from about 29 to 90 days. And then finally, the one that freaks us out the most usually as producers is this fetal mortality, which is abortion that usually occurs between 91 days and term. And those are the ones that we tend to see. And so we kind of get really upset about them. How about those other two? Do we see those? How might we see those? What do they show up as? Open cows, right? So why is it important and what can we do about it? So if we look at this table up here, this is work that's been done over summarized from a lot of different studies that Dr. Kohler and his group looked at, and we see that early embryonic mortality is about 48, 49%. Pretty good range in variation in the embryonic mortality. Late embryonic early fetal mortality is about 5%. Again, a pretty good range. And the ones we get all crazy about really is only about 1.2%, somewhere as high as 3%. But if you start seeing over 2% loss from the time you preg check, if you preg check to when those cows calve, then you need to start talking to your veterinarian and trying to figure out some things to do. But we get freaked out about this, but now you're looking at those numbers, and those of you that are good on mental math are like, Paul, if we had those kind of losses, we wouldn't have any cows pregnant, right? Because they're about half the cows or less than half the cows are pregnant. But what happens is, this is a study where they did it, they AI'd a large number of cows over quite a few ranches. They preg checked at 30 to 35 days, and then they preg checked again at 100 days. So this group of cows here in the black bar, those were cows that were diagnosed pregnant at 30 days and still had those AI pregnancies at 100 days. Okay. This group of cows were the cows that weren't pregnant at 30 days, but showed up pregnant. Some of them showed up pregnant at 100 days. And then this group was pregnant at 35 days, but when they rechecked them at 100 days, they didn't have AI calves in them anymore. They had calves that were like 40, 50 days old. So those animals have lost those pregnancies and become rebred. So what really happens in the real world is we get about 3/4 or more of those early embryonic mortalities back. Okay, we get those cows bred sometime between the start of the breeding season and the end of the breeding season. And then those cows that lose those embryos late, we only get about 42% of those back. So those are losses for us that some of them we can handle, and some of them we can't do much about. In this particular study, the 88% pregnancy rate overall, a little low, but it was done in the southeast. There's a lot of fescue down there. They tend to have higher embryonic mortalities, but still not too bad. So what happens? So that red line up there, those are those calves that were born to AI or in the first 21 days. So by 30 days, all those calves have been born. The ones that weren't pregnant but ended up getting pregnant, they had calved later. So what's the difference between those when we come to weaning time? How many pounds are we looking at? About 50 pounds, somewhere between 35, 50 pounds between those calves that are born early in the calving season, those calves that are born later. And then these are the cows that lost their calves, but some of them got bred back. And so if we look at it, so Dr. Wind was here, or is she still here?
Thank you, Matt.
Our real economist. So we're going to do cowboy math, Dr. Wind, okay? You can correct me later. My father was an agricultural economist. I spent 18 years of my life with him and only understood 50% of what he said. But anyway, so if we look at this, maybe we're doing a little better job. And we get about 55% of those cows bred AI. then about 40% fall into that early embryonic mortality group, and then 5%, like we talked about, are that late embryonic mortality. So we end up with 88%, like that study talked about. We end up with those calves weighing about 50 to 60 pounds more from those early pregnancies, and then you can see those differences in weights. These are kind of current prices. These are current steer prices. So cowboy math, we kind of had made an error there. We didn't blend the heifer steer price. But anyway, about a little over $1 million worth of calves for those 600 calves, right? What if we change that? What if we can do something to change part of that equation? So what if we shift 5% of those early embryonic mortalities up into that first service category? We end up picking up about 2% overall pregnancy rate. We end up picking up $32,000 or about $5,000 per 100 cows in value if we can do that. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how we might be able to do that. So first of all, where do these losses occur? We see about 5% of the losses right off the bat are from failures in fertilization. That could be a problem with the sperm quality. It could be a problem with egg quality. Could be a mismatch between when that cow expresses estrus and we either inseminate her or she gets bred by the bull. A lot of different functions there. Then during this early from 0 to day 7, we see a majority of those losses in that early time. Some of those could be DNA problems with genes. You know, there's some genetic defect there that causes that embryo not to divide properly. And so we don't really can't do a lot about that. But I guess one of the things I want to encourage you, if you're a purebred breeder, or if you're somebody who's one of those straight Angus commercial breeders, be careful, talk with your breeders that you're buying bulls from or your AI company, and make sure you're not getting some double copies of some lethal genes that are out there in some of these breeds. Day 7 to 16. So day 7 is usually if we do embryo transfer. That's when we collect those embryos. We don't see a lot of loss during that time period, pretty stable. But what we see is a good amount of loss in this 16 to 32. So day 16, around day 16 in the bovine or in the cow is when we have what we call maternal recognition of pregnancy. Maternal recognition of pregnancy is simply that embryo produces a protein that says kind of, hey mom, I'm here. She has to respond to that protein by maintaining her corpus luteum, which is the structure that produces progesterone, which is the hormone that maintains pregnancy. And if everything goes right, then that embryo stays. If we do anything to disrupt that signaling between embryo and maternal side, we see a problem with maintaining those pregnancies. That could be stress on the dam. That could be impaired development of the embryo, so that signal is either not given out at the right time or the right amount, and so we lose those pregnancies. I'll skip this slide. So what are some of those causes, stresses that cause these early embryonic mortalities? Heat stress is a big one, especially in the South, but also for us here part of the time. We'll talk about that in a minute. Nutrition is one that we can kind of have some control over. Transportation and handling is another area that we can lose calves in, and vaccines. So we're going to talk about those in the next few slides. So let's talk about nutrition. So one thing we know about nutrition, some work that was done in South Dakota, those of us that use AI or keep track of those first cycle pregnancy rates, I've always noticed that when we have heifers that we do projects with, it seems like our AI pregnancy rates aren't where they want to be. And it also seems like we don't get as many of those first service pregnancies established to the cleanup bulls that we normally would thought. So Dr. Perry and his group up in South Dakota said, well, we have these heifers, and because we're up north, we tend to develop those heifers in dry lot or small locations. We end up synchronizing those heifers, and then we end up turning, what do we do after we get done AI? Where do they go?
Turn a bunch of fat heifers out on pasture.
Turn a bunch of fat heifers out on pasture, right? So what are the first things heifers do when they get out there?
Run around.
Run around, they go bonkers, right? So one of the things they taught, so a change in nutrition in terms of diet density is what you're saying, right? Also, they noticed that those heifers also spent less time grazing. So decrease in nutrition just from the fact that Dr. Sprinkle was talking about grazing behavior. So they said, well, what would happen if we kept those heifers out on range? We just brought them in for the 10 days that we do estrus synchronization and then kick them back out on range. And when they did that, you can see that those heifers that were in the dry lot, about a 45% dry lot, then went out to pasture. They lost about 12% of their pregnancies or had a 12% lower pregnancy rate compared to those heifers that didn't see a real big change in their pre-breeding and post-breeding nutrition. So maintaining that pre-breeding and post-breeding nutrition so it's similar is very important. The other thing they asked was, what could we do? Can we do anything nutritionally to manage that? We may not have the opportunity to have those heifers out on grazing. There might not be any grazing out there for them. And we may not be able to change that, or we don't want to. So they did a study where they went ahead. These are AI pregnancy rates. They get a really good AI pregnancy rate. And what they did was they had heifers that were out on pasture. So this is not the season-long pregnancy rate. This is just the first 21-day pregnancy rate. And they were in dry lot and then they went out to pasture, or they were in dry lot and then they went out to pasture plus supplement. That supplement was 5 pounds of distiller's grains for a whole 42 days, which is kind of a long time to feed heifers. But that's what they did, and they improved pregnancy rates. So the take-home message there is we might be able to, with some nutritional supplementation, help out those pregnancy rates during the early part of the breeding season, if there is a nutritional change that we're going to see. The other thing people ask is, are there specific nutrients that we might be able to use to improve pregnancy rates? So this work was done with CSSO, which is a calcium salt of soybean oil. So one of the reasons we have to treat that soybean oil with a calcium salt is because we want to bypass those fats, bypass the rumen and get them into the small intestine. Okay. This happens to be high in omega-6 fatty acids. And you guys have heard forever and ever about omega fatty acids in human nutrition. And they said, so what they did in this particular study, they fed these in lick tubs from 10 days before they did AI through the rest of the 60-day breeding season. What they found was early on, they got higher pregnancy rates in those cows that received the omega-6 fatty acids compared to the control group, but they didn't really improve overall pregnancy rates, and they didn't improve pregnancy rates to natural service. So, and they've had other studies where they've looked at it for just 10 days before and then 21 days after AI and saw an improvement in pregnancy rates. So there may be some opportunities with some of these omega fatty acids, whether are the omega-6s or omega-3s, to increase early pregnancy rates. So those first service pregnancy rates or AI pregnancy rates in cows. Other nutritional factors. One is nitrates. So we've got a lot of interest in grazing cover crops and some of those things, or you might be grazing wheat. And so high nitrates, as you guys know, can kill cows. So what happens is that hemoglobin of the cow binds with the nitrate, becomes methemoglobin. It no longer can bind oxygen, and the animal essentially suffocates. Now, the thing about fetal hemoglobin is different from maternal hemoglobin. So if you think about it, if that maternal red blood cell is hanging on to oxygen, and that fetal hemoglobin was the same as the dam's hemoglobin, that fetus would have trouble getting that oxygen into itself. So fetal hemoglobin actually has a higher affinity for oxygen and therefore a higher affinity for nitrates to make methemoglobin. So we can have nitrate levels in the forage that aren't enough to kill cows, but will kill fetuses because of that extra binding of that fetal hemoglobin. The other thing is poor body condition. Now, it's really hard once we get about past 45 days of pregnancy to starve a cow enough to get her to abort. But those poor body condition score cows early in the breeding season are the ones that we might experience some more early embryonic mortality in, because that nutritional stress is causing that cascade of events that we talked about in that one graph not to happen in the proper manner. Toxic plants. So local weed out on some of our ranges, we do have local weed, not a real big problem, I don't think, in Idaho, but that it does exist. The other one that we have in Idaho and Montana a lot is ponderosa pine. So this time of year in late trimester, cows experience when it does snow. They get a big snowstorm, those cows get up under the ponderosa pines to get some shelter. They start eating those pine needles, and those pine needles have a substance in them that causes basically a premature delivery of those calves, and so those calves aren't ready to be born yet, and so they end up dying. So they're kind of a late term abortion. Mineral deficiencies, so trace minerals are important, copper, selenium, manganese, zinc, those are all important ones in terms of reproduction. So we need to have a good mineral program. Vitamin deficiencies, A and E, usually aren't a big problem if we're out on green grass and sunshine with vitamin D too. But if we're in the later part of it, if we're in winter, we need to supplement A and E. And especially if you're a fall calver and you're starting to breed cows in November and December now, instead of out when there's green grass, you need to provide that vitamin E. And then we need to watch molds and mycotoxins. Not usually a biggest thing, although Sawyer talked to you about proper hay storage and where there might be some molds in that hay. Most of the time, molds that we see in hay aren't a big problem for abortions, but they can be. We see those more in dairies, especially with silage and molds that we get in silage that might have some estrogenic activities. The other thing is in Idaho and a lot of the West, we move cows around a lot. At our research station, all those cows calve at the Nancy Cummings Center outside of Salmon. About half of those cows move down this way to just outside of Haley to the Rinker Rock Creek Ranch. That's a 4-hour truck ride. The other thing we do is we might trail those cows 5 or 6 miles going out to pasture. And some work that was done by Colorado State showed that if we move those cows early after breeding, if we did AI or if we expose them to bulls, if we breed them, move them 1 to 4 days, we don't see a decrease in pregnancy rates. Season-long pregnancy rates are good. But if we move them around that maternal recognition of pregnancy time, or even early on the edge of that late embryonic period, we see significant losses in pregnancies due to transportation stress. And if we wait to 45 or 60 days, we really don't see a lot of loss, significant amount of loss. So we need to try and make sure that if we're going to do transportation, especially if we're doing AI, or a lot of us that are in Idaho we might go out to a grazing association, but we like to breed that, try and get 21 day, 1 cycle worth of breeding on the bulls that we bought, because we don't know who in the heck is going to breed our cow once it goes out with the association. And so if all of a sudden then we're trying to move those cows right at that day 21, starting into their next cycle, we might be losing some of those fetuses if that's when we're moving them. So just something to keep in mind and see what you might be able to do management wise with that. Temperament, okay? This is what happens when frat boys are told there is really such thing as cow tipping, okay? And the Gelby heifer decided she wasn't too thrilled with that. We all probably have had some cows that are athletic and maybe have some mental issues, okay? But Dr. Cook from Texas A&M has done a lot of work looking at the impact of cow temperament. And the bottom line is that there's about a 6% decrease in pregnancy rate, calving rate, and weaning rate in those cows that are considered either aggressive or flighty compared to more mentally stable individuals. And so we need to remember that. The other thing is, some of us don't bounce as well as we used to, okay? I don't bounce worth a darn anymore, and so we don't need crazy cows around from a health standpoint and insurance standpoint. So the other thing that makes cows crazy besides just genetics is what? Crazy cowboys can make crazy cows, all right? And so we got to remember about low stress handling and doing things the right way. Good facilities. One of the things that's really nice about working out in the West compared to some other parts of the country is usually people have some pretty darn decent facilities and they spend some time in planning. But if your facilities aren't working right, make sure they're in good shape. And if they're not working right, get somebody in to help you maybe kind of reorganize or restructure those facilities. Well-trained crew, okay? Whether they're on horseback or in the corrals or on chutes, okay? Some people, hey, you got me on horseback, I'm great gathering cows. Put me in to fit in the corrals, I'm not so good. Part of that is because I'm elevationally impaired. So reaching over to grab the gate is, I need a pretty good horse to do that. But I'm okay at the chute. Because of this tremor, I don't run the squeeze chute as much anymore as I used to, but I can sure push cows, right? Now, some people just don't need to be there at all, right? That idiot cousin, the guy that wants to shot everything comes down and he needs to be out in the hay field, baling hay or something like this. Cows need to be used to low stress handling. Heifers especially may need some practice. So it's very stressful for a heifer to come into your facilities for the first time. The dairymen know that all the time. The dairymen know that when you put heifers in, fresh heifers in, trying to get them trained and calmed down and used to the situation is important. So your heifers might need some practice. If you got an opportunity, you can just run those heifers right through the facility, not catch them or anything, just to have them know which way's in and which way's out. And that'll help them out, be less stressed the next time. Dogs, right dog, right place, right time. Now, there's a lot of people you can say ugly things about their children. But if you say anything about their dog, you're in trouble. And dogs are great. Dogs are great out on range, getting stuff out of the willows and keeping things moving around. Really good dogs are good at herding. I have a problem with dogs around chutes because those cows can't get away enough from that pressure, and that creates a lot of stress. All right. And so you guys know, you've had friends come over and they bring their dogs with them and you go, oh, God, you put that dog. Right? But it's your place. What? What?
Don't say anything
But you
about
can't say anything about it. That's right. Hot shots, very limited, very strategic. Be really careful when you use them and just use them when you have to. We have Hereford Angus cross cows up at the research station. And I think Herefords lack pain fibers. I really do. So occasionally there's an old Hereford cross cow that we need to get the hot shot out for because she's just not going to move. She's just more stubborn moving. The other thing is no stupid stuff. Now you would think people would have a brain, but a colleague of mine was doing a big estrosynchronization study over multiple ranches. And he rolls into this one ranch on breeding day. And the cowboys are sitting up on the corral fence with 30-06s shooting turtles in the pond. Pregnancy rate was 35% to AI at that location. And the guy that owned the cattle was really honked off that they had messed up the AI. Not that his cowboys had done anything, but the technician, Dusty, didn't know what he was doing breeding those cows, right? You'd be amazed. We always can use a refresher. Anytime you got a chance to go to a stockmanship and stewardship type program, go ahead and get it. We can learn anything. Anytime I'm working with somebody else, with somebody's cows, I learn some new things. Hopefully good things. My grandchildren I have to keep aware, they learn new words. Know what low stress is, For some people, low stress is the horses and the cattle are not completely lathered when they get to the corral. Right? But just make sure you know what that is. This is what happens. I mean, this poor little Brahma heifer has a strike against her because she's Brahman, so she's infertile to begin with. And now that embryo has just squirted itself out because those dogs have taken care of it. So just kind of reduce stress is really important. Heat stress. One of the things we forget about heat stress is sperm damage. So bulls are one of the things that's most affected by heat stress. And in Idaho, usually we're in good shape because we get night cooling. We go down below 70 degrees at night. That helps those cattle dissipate that heat that they built up through the day and helps out. But don't forget, if you're breeding if we get a really hot spell, to think we might have some problems with bull fertility and see some gaps in our calving thing. The other thing is if you shifted your calving from down to April, May, or May, June calving. And now you've got bulls out there in July, August, and early September. You might have some problems with bull fertility. We talked about embryo damage from heat, heat stress, hostile uterine conditions, you know, those substances that are secreted by the uterus that nourish that fetus, embryo, when it hasn't yet, before it has implanted. We can change that uterine environment and cause reduction in fetal growth, and then things get messed up. Reduced nutrition, you guys know when you're hot, you don't eat as well. Dr. Sprinkle talked about changes in grazing behavior associated with heat. So that becomes a decrease in energy intake and reduce that. We also get hormonal disruptions, maybe a release of LH or FSH or prostaglandins. So vaccinations, infectious bovine rhinitis, IBR, bovine viral diarrhea, BVD, lepto, Vibrio, and brucellosis all can cause abortions. We're going to talk a little bit more about those in a minute. But work with your veterinarian on that program for vaccines for your particular herd and what they think you should use.
Dr. Hall?
Yes.
Like timing of these ahead of breeding is important too. And then, I mean, how far you can affect your breeding with the vaccines too close to breeding?
Yeah. So good question, which leads into the next slide. Excellent. It is great. So yeah, so the comment that was made was, can giving those vaccinations too close to breeding cause problems with fertility? And certainly it can. If we get much closer than 30 days in cattle that have already been exposed to modified live viruses, we see decreases in pregnancy. Now, there's some research out there with modified live viruses that says even in cattle that have had modified live viruses, if we give modified live even 30 days prior to AI, we cause some inflammation in the ovary and cause some decrease in egg quality. And we see a decrease in pregnancy rates compared to a killed vaccine. Right? And some of that even carried through to slightly lower overall pregnancy rate. Now, other studies say that's not the case. They say here in this case, pregnancy rates were actually better in these fall calving cows that got modified live compared to those that got killed. And similar in spring, same thing up here for season-long pregnancy rates. And then this study saw there was actually a decrease, not significant, not a statistically significant decrease. So basically no difference in embryonic mortality or pregnancy losses in those cattle. So the main thing is you work with your veterinarian and figure out what they advise and what your vaccine types may or may not matter. Okay, first of all, there may be other things you've got going on in your situation that are causing you pregnancy problems, that vaccines the small part of the issue. The other thing is killed viruses for naive cattle close to breeding could be just as much of a problem as those for modified lives. So we got to make sure they're at the right space. First time you use killed vaccine, you have to have boosters, so they're a pain because there's 2 trips to the chute. So really just work with your veterinarian and figure out and make sure you understand that you've taken care of all the other possibilities before you make major changes. But the point that was made earlier about the question, we try and get those vaccines done 45 to no closer than 30 days before the start of the breeding season, if we can. Now, fetal mortality, kind of the thing that always freaks us out, because these are the ones we see, right? And cows are stupid. Someone aborts, and so the first thing they do is go over and lick it or sniff it or eat it. And Dr. Summers, you can explain to me sometime how a cow can eat that much protein and actually do something with it, with the rumen microbes, all right? But anyway. So a lot of these different diseases that you guys are used to hearing about, and they differ. A lot of them are last trimester, last half, last trimester. So those are those late abortions that we tend to see. Okay, but there are ones that cause us early embryonic mortality, BVD, Vibrio, trick. Early mortalities. The nice thing is, a lot of them, we've got good vaccines for that are effective and will help prevent things. Of course, with trick, in Idaho, you've got to test bulls for trichomoniasis. And you need to get that done and adhere to that very, very closely. There's nothing worse than getting a trick outbreak because it's just a nightmare. You get to the preg check chute, you got half the cows that are open. And it's really, really a sad thing. Bulls don't ever get better. Nothing we can do for those bulls except cull them. Cows get over it, but before they get over it, they've infected bulls and infected other cows, so we have to monitor that. Kind of newer ones for us, for that have been hanging around in the dairy industry, Neospora and Sarcocystis, which are really coming from dogs and coyotes and fecal material contaminating the feedstuffs. So we need to watch out for those diseases. But basically, those are things that are fairly preventable. And again, one we talked about earlier, those are usually 1 to 3% unless we've got an outbreak with one of these diseases in losing those fetuses. The last thing is we've spent a lot of time trying to get those cows pregnant. We get them bred. We want to make sure they have healthy calves that don't succumb to weak calf syndrome. I have here to start the cows that in the fall at body condition score 5. That's kind of hard to do sometimes. But definitely by the time we get to calving season, they need to be body condition score 5 or 6, and that's on a 9-point scale where 1 is so emaciated they can hardly stand up, and 9 is so fat that you could put your picnic blanket down and have a picnic on top of her back, right? Develop your winter feeding plan, maintain body condition, make sure you meet those protein, energy, and mineral requirements. So weak calf syndrome is usually a protein and trace mineral deficiency in those calves that gives them problems. Like I said, Dr. Summers done a lot of work with the fetal programming and nutrition in that last trimester can have lifelong effects on the calf. One of the big ones is we see that calves that come out of cows that are properly nourished in the last trimester have higher weaning weights, do better in the feedlot, do better in carcass composition. And also in some studies, seen that heifers that are born to cows that were properly nourished during the last trimester reach puberty earlier and stay in the herd longer and have more calves over their life. So some take-home messages, body condition score of those cows. It's easy to do. If you need a primer, you need a refresher on that, just give us a call. Anybody that your county extension educator will get you hooked up with some information. Remember to reduce those nutritional changes early in the breeding season and understand what your nutritional challenges are on your ranch. Whether it's taking hay samples like Sawyer talked about, or understanding your range and your grazing. Try to limit that transportation stress if we can to that very early time immediately after breeding. Use low stress handling. Make sure you train your crew and don't be afraid to say, you need to go do something else rather than help us. Call those crazy cows. Minimize heat stress if you can, either through management or just not stressing those cattle during those hot times. Work with your veterinarian on a vaccination program and schedule. And watch those cows and make sure everything's going good. Preg check, and the way you'll understand what's going on in your herd is to have a good preg check. Good preg checking program and to kind of keep track of where you are with pregnancy rates and calving rates. Got any questions? I'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, my contact info is up there and you're welcome to call or email me anytime.